Hey, are you curious about Montana and maybe you're researching moving here, but you're really wondering how bad does the winter actually get? Well, we've had some pretty bad weather lately, and in this video we're just going to talk about what that looks like in an everyday scenario. But it's like 8 below out here and windy, so we're going to find someplace warmer to talk. Okay, not too bad, but this was built for children, so we're gonna go find someplace even warmer. Okay, that's better. Hey, my name's Heather with Montana Life, and in this channel I strive to give you an accurate everyday picture of life in Montana so you're not caught unawares when you move here. And today we're going to talk about the weather. What's the worst weather you can expect to experience during a Montana winter? And I live in Livingston, so we're going to base it off of Livingston weather, and then you can adjust it depending on what area of Montana you're most interested in. But this should give you a baseline at least. And we'll do some statistics, but for the most part we're going to keep it to what does it look like in everyday working mom life. Okay, so now that we're in a slightly nicer environment and Maggie is much happier hanging out by the fireplace than in the snow cave, we'll get started. Okay, according to the National Weather Service for Livingston, in 1961 we had a record high of 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and in 1983, that's what my kids call the olden days, we had a record low of 41 below zero. Negative 41, 41 below zero. I think you say one or the other, but not both of them. 40 below zero Fahrenheit. Precipitation in inches was 19.11 in 2019, and then in 2012 we had 8.62 inches of precipitation. So that's snow and rain combined. So if you like to garden, the next one will interest you. In 2002, August 17th was our earliest frost date. Our latest frost date was June 29th, 1968. Okay, and for 2022 we had an average wind speed of 15 miles an hour with the highest gust being 75 miles an hour. I've seen the weather station in town register 110, but apparently it didn't do it this year. That was like a couple years ago when I saw that one. And yearly precipitation for this year was 14.13 inches for the year. Now, we also had some of the worst flooding in recorded history this last year. Maybe some of you heard of it. Houses washed away and Yankee Jim Canyon flooded pretty severely. The park was closed for a good portion of the summer, and it was pretty crazy. But we're talking about winter, that was summer, so we'll save that for another video. Okay, so when I give the average precipitation rates, that's including both rain and snow. And national average, 1 inch of rain equates to 13 inches of snow. However, Montana is a very dry state. We have very low humidity, so I would say we were probably on the higher end of that average. So, we might be more like 1.5 feet or 2 feet of snow per inch of rain. I'm not a weather person. This is just what I've gleaned off the internet to try to give you an idea, and I would say that's pretty accurate from my experience on the ground. Okay, so all the statistics are great and everything, but what does that actually look like in everyday mom life? Okay, so for Livingston, telling how much snow accumulation we have is a little bit difficult because we usually have the wind and it blows it around or blows it away. So for the most part, we don't have a ton of snow. What we deal with is ice underneath the snow and drifts. It's February 2023, and I would say we probably have only had a handful of big snows this year. There's only a couple inches on the ground right now, but we definitely have some big drifts, as you saw earlier. Okay, so what can you expect for really cold temperatures? I would say in a normal winter, you can expect a handful of times during the winter for it to be below zero. For example, today it's 6 below zero. Now normally that wouldn't be that bad. Everything's usually still running. You're able to get your car started at that temperature. But we have a wind today and it feels like 31 below according to the weather app that I have on my phone. So the wind chill factor can be significant and start causing issues at that point. But fortunately, below zero weather usually only lasts a couple of days, and then you warm up, you're able to get things thawed out and get going again. In my experience, getting your car started is typically not a big deal down to like 10 below. You start getting 15 to 20 below, and if your battery is not up to par, You may have issues. You may have to charge your battery before you can start your car, jump start it, plug in a block heater, or keep it in a garage. So, but most cars down to 10 below-ish, they're probably gonna start okay. So one thing to note, if you're a parent, usually schools will go out, even if it's 0 degrees out and sunny, they're gonna take the kids out to recess. They just will. I know each school probably has a different temperature cutoff, and if it's windy, they probably won't take them out. But you need to make sure that your kids are pretty bundled up because school here does not stop unless it's pretty bad out. In Livingston in particular, we don't have very many snow days for school. However, right after Christmas, we had some very nasty weather here. It was below 0. I think we were 21 below 0 or something like that, and it was windy and it snowed. So it would drift the roads shut. That wasn't because it was so cold that they stopped everything. It was because they couldn't keep up with the plowing, because it would drift in within, 20 minutes and have things closed up again. So the buses couldn't get through, and a lot of the public schools were still open, but it was kind of like, if you can get here, you can come to school, but don't worry about it if it's too hard to get here. And some of the private schools did end up closing down just because of their situation in town where they were located. They weren't able to keep the roads open. So that was a really nasty bit of cold weather. That doesn't happen super often. I would say that was probably the worst weather I've seen, and I've been here for about 5 years. So the other thing that happened during that really bad cold snap was the interstate got shut down. They had some wrecks, and it was just too difficult to keep it open. It was too dangerous, so they shut it down. There's a section that kind of goes up and around Livingston, and that section gets really windy. Visibility can be very bad with the snow blowing across it. And then wherever the snow blows across, it polishes the ice and makes the road colder, so it's slick. So you can't see, it's slick, and then you never know if somebody's stopped in front of you or something like that. So they end up shutting it down and slowing traffic down and routing it all through Livingston on the main street and then back up onto I-90. And I actually ended up being out driving in it, and it was so polished and so icy because we had really warm 40-degree days, and everything had melted onto the pavement, and then it got down below 0, so it froze really hard and the plows weren't able to get it up. It was just solid. And then everybody drove on it, polished it, so it was really icy. And I was sitting there in traffic, and I was sliding sideways because the wind was pushing me off the road. It wasn't going fast, it wasn't gonna hurt anything, but it was just, the wind was pushing my car across the ice sideways. Again, that's not typical. That's, maybe on a bad snow day every couple of years. The other thing that happened to me when it was 20 below 0 was I ended up having to run to town for groceries. So do as I say, not as I do. Stock up before the cold weather hits so you don't have to run to town for groceries. Now, I probably could have not run to town, and it probably wasn't worth it, but I needed a few other things. So I did end up driving on the interstate, and I let my car warm up for a good 30 minutes, trying to get the engine nice and warm, went and fed the animals, and then jumped on the interstate, and my car heater just couldn't keep up, and it was frosting up on the inside. So I whipped out a card from my wallet and started scraping on the inside of the windshield, trying to get the frost off enough that I could see. Fortunately for me, there was actually nobody else out on the interstate, so there was nobody behind me. It was not the safest situation, but I got through it because there was no traffic. Otherwise, I would have probably pulled over and scraped my windshield a little bit better. And actually, you can see I kind of chipped up my card a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind is not only bundle up your children really well, and send them to school, but to keep your pets inside, or at least have them someplace where they can get warm, because we have a new puppy, Maggie, and she was outside and it was 20 below. She did her business, and then she stopped. She curled up her paws and she laid down in the snow, and she was just gonna die right there. It was too cold for her. She wasn't gonna move anymore. So Chad ended up picking her up and carrying her inside. Another thing that happened is all the eggs froze and cracked in my hen house, so it was a little chilly in there. I do have a light in there for them, and chickens are pretty tough, but it broke all the eggs that day. The cows weren't super happy about it, but they're pretty furry, so they survived. Biggest thing there is just to make sure they have food and water and a little bit of shelter. The biggest takeaway is, yes, we have some extreme weather. It does get cold and nasty, especially when you have all those elements combining, the cold, the snow, and the wind. But for the most part, it's only gonna last a few days to a week. then it's going to get nice again. You're going to have some weather to thaw out a little bit. And then just the biggest thing is to be prepared. So make sure you buy your groceries before it gets 20 below zero so you don't have to drive on the nasty interstate. And then another thing to do is just keep your car in good running order. Make sure the battery's good, or you have a way to like plug it in or recharge it. Just kind of think through these things. What would I do if the electricity went out? How would I heat my house if it got really cold and the furnace quit? Because typically what happens when it gets really cold is not one thing will go wrong. You'll have multiple things go wrong. You can usually handle one. It's not a big deal. It's when things keep cascading and getting worse and worse that it gets stressful for everybody. And it's not just you. You might have a neighbor that needs a hand, or, you know, family member calls you for a ride or something. So just anticipate that things will be a little bit slower on those really cold days, and think ahead, have a plan B, have a second source of heat for your house. If you have medications that you need to get those ahead of time, have a little bit of a stockpile, food, water, that type of thing. And you should be just fine. So I hope that helped you out a little bit with what you could expect during a Montana winter. And if you want to chat more, I can sure help you out with that. My contact information is in the description below, and I'd love to chat with you. If you have any other questions about Montana, please feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email, or schedule a virtual meeting with me.